Italians, but I know all the world is participating to this webinar. Because as I mentioned more than once in our group, Lombardy has been one of the regions that has been highly with a high rate of contagions, and there also we have a high density of intensive farming. So I think there is a lot to do there. So thank you for this. I would have a question, but I of course prefer to let the floor before to the many people that kindly joined us today. I don't see from my position any. Yes, I see one hand. Raise hand, Alena Kamenshchikova. I hope I pronounce it well. So Alena, if you want to introduce you briefly introduce 1 or 2 sentences, and then you make your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. My name is Alena, and I'm a PhD researcher at the Maastricht University in the Netherlands. And I work with antimicrobial resistance practices in different social worlds. And thank you very much for this presentation. I very much agree with everything you said, so I was nodding along all this hour. And I wanted to ask also your perspective. When you showed the map with the global traveling, I think it's interesting because what this map shows is the interconnectedness of the world, how we are all entangled, not only with different species, but also with each other. At the same time, what we see in our political, but also scientific language is often when we speak about different diseases, bacteria and viruses, they're not only associated with certain species, such as bats and mice, but also with geographical territories and even people. Of course, we have heavily racially loaded political discourses, but also in science, you can hear about India has been source of certain bacteria, Asia has been source of all kinds of viruses, and etc. So I was wondering, when we speak about multi-species entanglement, whether we also need to raise a question of new kind of terminology and languages in which we speak about this topic, when we bring balance not only between different species, but also between territories and humans, highlighting this interconnectedness.
Yeah, thank you for that very important question. And I think that map was doing some interesting political work. And I think, you know, pushing and poking at the empirical basis of it is not in any way trying to dismember the viral kinship that map kind of invoked. At the same time, I think it, you know, like thinking with a philosopher like Immanuel Kant, who celebrated the cosmopolitan, or even Bradodi, who celebrates the nomad. And, you know, this is an existence that I was inhabiting, may still inhabit. You know, for me, that map is also doing interesting political work to just mobilize consciousness about the ways that these elite practices of travel are creating an increasingly precarious situation for others, human others, but also multiple other species. I think it's completely possible to, you know, and maybe I'll also say something from viral taxonomy. So the current norm in coronavirus taxonomy, which is reflecting a broader taxonomic mandate, is to not name organisms based on place. So, you know, we now know that the Spanish flu did not come from Spain. We might know in 5 years that the coronavirus didn't come from Wuhan or China even. You know, this could have been a cosmopolitan because of the way that the modern world system works. It could have emerged in Italy, or it could have emerged in Brazil. Like we don't know enough at this standpoint, at this point. And we might not ever know. Like, holding a space for mystery in this story, I think is the hard part, especially at a moment when, you know, you have Donald Trump talking about the Kung flu and the Chinese virus, and counter allegations from the Chinese Communist Party, about the U.S. military, but trying to hold that space for curiosity, for investigation, for just kind of muddling through the very complicated clouds of data, I think is very important. And I also think part of your question was super important and related to something that Warwick Anderson said last night. And Warwick's piece, by the way, if you also saw people like Zizek and Agamben and Nancy and others out there saying, you know, almost Trumpian things early in the pandemic. I think Warwick Anderson's piece on philosophy in the pandemic is a really excellent read. But Warwick, in part, is insisting in that piece to know something new in the pandemic. He's got a paragraph where he goes back to the idea of autoimmunity. So at a certain point, it was thought that HIV was not because of the virus, but because of some kind of autoimmune disorder. And Derrida had a creative misreading of the AIDS pandemic or epidemic that kind of informed his whole, you know, elaboration of autoimmunity. So being afraid, being you know, in part, it's an invitation to do deep, interesting theoretical work that isn't just about, you know, trotting out what you already know, which is in part what I did today. Like, you know, I wrote this paper, Multispecies Ethnography, here's how to apply it to today. But, you know, in going forward and thinking with the specificities of these viral genomes and the ways that it might be in process and in collaboration with our bodies, but also the ways that processes and publics are getting reconfigured by the pandemic, I'd like to learn something new, and I think that's what you're calling for. So I think it's an open invitation for all of us who are writing in the pandemic. I mean, at this point, I think a lot of us are sick of reading, and so it is a challenge to say something new, to find the important thing to say. But I think the field is wide open for a multitude of researchers to get out there and try to write into the gaps, to inhabit those spaces of mystery, curiosity, and wonder, even amidst all the horrible things that are happening.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And we start to have people interested in questions. So I would propose to collect them and in groups. So we have Avi. Avi?
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
Hi, thank you very much. I had two quick questions. When you say that there's no deliberate creation, I just find that an interesting, how do you relate that in a sense that that's putting deliberateness in a sort of individualistic sense, rather than there being a deliberate sense of institutions and collections of people not changing the pathways of action that they're going along. So I'm not sure that saying it's not deliberate versus deliberate is necessarily a clear way to look at it. I just wondered what your thoughts are. And then the second question was, I see a lot of people saying it's like transforming people's lives. But apart from an open invitation, I have yet to observe anything that's not just an exaggeration of what was already there in terms of reactive securitization, or on the other hand, sort of an economic centric idea. So I really would like to know what this transformation is. And the last question is, you talked about almost a post-ecosystem perspective. I would love to know more about that. Thank you.
That's a lot already. I'll try to respond. So I think in relation to the idea of deliberate, I was thinking mostly just in the specific of, you know, if this virus was bioengineered, and I think I want to mute you because I hear an echo. If this virus was bioengineered, what one would expect is copy paste. So, you know, I know something about this from my work in CRISPR. If you've got a gene that's well described in another organism, what's relatively easy to do is with your browser, you just select a string of A's and T's and G's and C's and slot it into a viral backbone or some other architecture. You send it off to a lab, they basically synthesize that virus, it comes back, and then it has a novel protein that is derived from another organism. To use the tools of synthetic biology to construct a novel pathogen or novel organism, base pair by base pair by base pair by base pair, takes a massive budget, a lot of trial and error. So we don't see the novel parts of the spike protein just don't have any evidence of that that cut paste work. So I guess in thinking about a more abstract notion of deliberateness, I don't think this surprising emergence is any kind of direct, like there's all sorts of ways that people love to blame others for disease, and often that happens along xenophobic lines. And in part of my work now is showing how that works in interspecies relations. Like the bats did it, let's exterminate all the bats, or yeah, like nature did it, as someone is just writing in the chat. But what we saw is a complex totality, a global world system that had all kinds of pathologies of process, if we're going to bring back Gregory Bateson. But there wasn't a specificity of that institution that produced this moment. There could have been a lot of different emergent moments that disrupted the system. It wasn't like there was a deliberateness of this pre-planned system that produced a particular moment. And in response to the transformations, yeah, I mean, and speaking about hope and speaking about possibility, I want to recognize the ways that life has become so hard for so many people. Not just the precarious agricultural laborers in California, not just people in prison, not just people who are suddenly in this complicated work-life relationship where they can't get time to do their job or have been rendered unemployed. But I think amidst that backdrop of all the horrible things that are going on, people are learning to improvise and to do, composing their lives differently. That's drawing on Gregory Bateson's daughter's work, Mary Catherine Bateson, also an anthropologist. Her book, Composing a Life, talks about the ways that we improvise. And I think for those of us who were living in this homogeneous empty time where career paths were predefined, where you were on a track and there was clear figures of personal hope within your imaginative horizons, to have that suddenly disrupted gives that space of imagination and new possibility. So by no means am I trying to celebrate the mass death and the unemployment and all the precariousness that this pandemic has engendered, but to also think about it as a moment when people are becoming freer to imagine and recompose their life in new ways. And I think I missed your middle question, but I see a lot of other hands too.
Yes, thanks, Eben. And some other questions are texted in the chat, so I'm taking the list of all these people. So instead of just having the text, if you want, you can voice your question. So now we have Jacob Zinstag.
Hello, I'm a veterinary epidemiologist, maybe one of the rare veterinarians listening to that seminar. But first of all, I was very interested by your vocabulary, which is very process philosophical. You use the term process and also becoming, and this is very close to Alfred North Whitehead. And I just wanted to ask you if you refer actually to him. Then I appreciate very much your approach on multi-species perspective. We are working on One Health. I'm the author of this book on One Health, and we actually study human and animal health together. And there we come also to the conclusion that we need a multi-species perspective. I call it also a post-humanist perspective, because we need to go away from a purely anthropocentric point of view to a perspective that encompasses animals and the environment. It is a much more co-creational attitude. And I wanted to actually ask you, how much would you adhere to that term post-humanist, or what kind of terminology would you propose? I think this really leads into a new humanities paradigm. Thank you very much.
So thank you for that question, and thank you for coming. I would love to continue the conversation. I'm actively looking for veterinarians who are interested in collaborating. So the post-humanities conversation is one with a legacy, and I would point to Carrie Wolf's book series at the University of Minnesota Press, and there's been a lot of really smart interventions in that space, from Michel Serres' work on the Parasite, which is a very playful reading of, you know, the ways that the host can become the guest, and you know, right, it's an English translation, but you know, playing with all the ways that the parasite in French is a language play. Donna Haraway's When Species Meet is in that book series. And you know, I think for Carrie Wolf and Rosie Brododi, who's also kind of a key leading thinker in the post-human trajectory, yeah, it's sort of an oxymoron saying, like, you know, the post-human condition recognizes that we've never been human, which is kind of Haraway's contention. You know, very much allied with sort of the post-structuralist turn from an earlier philosophical moment. And I think myself, I definitely owe a lot of my thinking to Whitehead and people who've interpreted Whitehead. So Haraway, Isabel Stengers, and many others are I must confess, haven't done the deep dive into Whitehead, and I know that I should, and everyone keeps telling me you'll love it, and maybe the pandemic is the perfect time to do that deep reading. One other book I think you might like, just because you brought up One Health and you've written on it, is Natalie Porter's new book, and she's exploring One Health in the context of Vietnam, and fully appreciating the ways that the One Health paradigm asks people to think kind of outside of an anthropocentric space, but as an ethnographer, documenting how international aid organizations that were promoting One Health led to development programs that ended up disempowering local poultry producers and farmers. So it's an interesting take on the One Health that, you know, I think she's very sympathetic to kind of the philosophical and ethical underpinnings of the One Health paradigm, but she's also kind of showing how it unravels in this local situation and ends up reinforcing big corporate interests over smallholding farmers. But I'd love to be in touch after the talk.
So thanks very much. The next one is Cesar Giraldo Herrera. Cesar.
Hi, Eben.
Hi.
Hi. I'm well, you know me, but the rest don't. I'm a biologist and anthropologist, and I'm working at the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research. And I share the interest with microbes, and I share most of the positions. Well, before working with people, I was working with bats, so I also have kind of a very close relation with them. And I appreciate that you are kind of taking their side as well. That's important. On the other side, well, perhaps I'm taking issue with one thing, that it's a standard in the West, and is assuming virus as not living beings, which is a standard, but at the same time is a bit problematic, because it makes something that is actually very complex, it simplifies it. And I feel that it has a lot to do with the ontology of the West rather than with what virus might be. So perhaps I would like to push you a little bit more into what would be the perspective of the virus, kind of going beyond reproduction, and hear what you think about it. And something a bit more mundane, I was wondering if you had read anything about co-infection between different coronaviruses, and how much exchange of material there is in cases of co-infection, if there is co-infection. Thank you so much. It was great.
So on that last point, I haven't found those papers yet, and I'm digging deep into that literature. So if you want to read it together, pick some papers and come to the reading group. I would love, and I've got some people who could probably recommend papers. So yeah, at this point, I know that there's a lot less recombination among coronavirus strains than there is for certain influenza strains, for example. So I think that's one very basic part of biology that everyone should know better. But yes, and thank you for the invitation on to kind of slow down with that point. I ran really quickly over it. And I think what I really like about John Dupre and Stefan Goodinger's paper is that it says viruses are alive or lively sometimes, which kind of, so insisting that by itself, at least, a coronavirus in viral capsids with these receptors on its surface, like it's kind of there by itself, and it's without that collaborative relationship and dynamic with other living processes, it doesn't become, it just is. But like you can unravel that too. Like the coronavirus is just one kind of viral life, and I actually got way too deep yesterday in the primary virology literature, and was just reading about the multiple theories of origins of viruses. So one thing I found fascinating is that it's not monophyletic, which in regular person speak, that means that tree of life doesn't work out at all. There's not like a single viral ancestor that goes everywhere. There's some genes that apparently are shared amongst many viruses, but not all. And then there's some sort of quasi-viral independent particles that are very good at like being out in the world without any other organisms, like doing their thing and reproducing. So one theory that probably all of you are familiar with is that viruses are the origin of life. These particles interact, these proteins fold in complicated ways, learn how to self-replicate. But I think, yeah, thinking life outside of reproduction is important. Is a seed alive? I mean, if you isolate a viral particle in a seed, like I don't know, maybe that logic does fall apart if you push and look at other kind of sporulated forms, like chytrids sporulate and produce these very stable spores that endure for a long time. And it's, I guess, less about multi-species conditions of life, but or at least the theory is, just add water or just add sun, and this thing springs to an autonomous existence. But I think, the more that we know about life, species aren't isolated. They're holobionts. They're organisms that live in dynamic relation with others. So if you isolate a rat, you can create a rat that doesn't have microbiota in its gut. But will it flourish? I mean, you can keep it in a cage and provide it with the bare conditions of life. So yeah, this question of what is alive, I think is an open one, and I don't feel like I've entirely come down on the side of like, is a virus alive? Is it dead? And I feel like inhabiting what the anthropologists call the liminal space of unknowing is most interesting with these forms. And I find myself constantly slipping with my language, like calling them organisms, but they're not. I think I said that in this talk. It's not an organism, I don't think, but yeah, it's very difficult to speak about these things that are barely perceptible and knowable. But yeah, let's read those papers together.
Great, thanks. We now have a question from Robin Root who wrote his question in the chat. Robin, do you prefer to voice your question, or do you prefer me to read it? If you're still there.
I'm reading it now.
Are you reading? Okay.
as a medical anthropologist of HIV/AIDS, religion and AIDS, who did old school ethnography, can you describe what the new field sites look like, the labs, archival work? What form does participant observation methods take? Thanks so much, Robin Root, MPH, PhD, New York City. So Robin, I'll talk mostly about not my book, which is all about HIV/AIDS. So the story of gene editing is a story of innovation and inequality. So I've been spending the time in labs that are, and companies that have been doing, participating in this venture that's in many ways aimed specifically at trying to develop a cure to HIV or develop a human condition. Like that experiment in China that I mentioned at the beginning is trying to delete a receptor called CCR5 out of the cells of human children. And the evidence I saw leads me to suspect that it worked, at least on a genetic level. The children were never tested to see if their blood is infectious to HIV amidst the scandal that wasn't tested. So for me to do that field work, it involved, ventures to California, where Sangamo Biosciences has been working with HIV positive veterans of ACT UP to do earlier gene editing experiments. It involved trying to understand the contours of gay and bisexual lives in China and the very complicated epistemologies of the closet that the parents who signed up for this experiment were living with. It involved archival research, like dealing with video recordings that were made in the lab in Shenzhen, where these children were designed. I got access to video chats, to text messages, to all sorts of digital ephemera. And then, yeah, just a lot of talking to people, the scientists, the technicians, attending conferences. So the field site was really polymorphic. And as I venture into these worlds of COVID-19, I think it'll take some of the similar polymorphic, like the field is, I don't know, I guess it's using George Marcus again, just like I go back to following the thing. Like, I need to follow gene editing in HIV. That means I need to go to Shenzhen, I need to go to Penn Medicine in Philadelphia. I need to go to Berkeley, California. And I think in doing a new project about COVID-19, the challenge is going to be where to stop and where to start. I mean, it's everywhere. So for now, I'm just kind of going slow and trying to find the naturalists, the taxonomists who really know the virus, and just have those initial conversations and then see kind of where the lines of flight take me next.
Thanks. The next question comes from someone who wrote in the chat, Shubhananji Srivastava.
Yes.
Okay. Hello.
Yeah. Hi. Hi, I'm Shubhangi Srivastava, and a lovely talk, insightful talk. Thank you so much. And I'm a PhD scholar in India. I'm working on urban canids and looking at canine ecologies and how dogs and humans interact with each other, and what cultures they form together, and how the dogs combining ethnography and ethology, how these interactions are formed, and how they frame the canine city in itself. And that's my work. And my question is from your the paper which was shared. So you were talking there about how there were some articles where there was mention of how companion animals like cats or dogs and other farm animals also, they could be they could have been the virus could have passed through them also, and how that it's more, I think that my question is not more on emergence but also on an impact, how those articles and those research, they cause an impact, because I saw that happening in and around my area, how people reacted to those, and how there was a major abandonment of pet dogs. And then similarly, there were chickens in the farm industry, chickens which is eaten which is like a very high level industry here, but still after that scare, after those articles, the chickens were abandoned, and they were just let out into the farms, and they were slaughtered, or in that way not basically sold for being eaten. So how that impacts, and where in these situations, how different species they are together impacted by such cases is something I would want your perspective on. Yeah.
So for starters, it sounds like you're doing really fascinating and important work, and I can't wait to read what you write about this. So I really hope that you trace that article from Science as it plays out on social media and all the other forms that people have of talking about it. Yeah. I don't know anything about that particular situation, but it does remind me of a really important piece published about human-dog relations in Israel called Pets as Flexible Persons. And it's a really smart engagement with the notion of personhood that looks at how people basically are regarding dogs in that context. It might be totally different in South Asia, but you know, in endowing them with kinship terms, calling them, oh, my baby, my child, like blah, blah, blah. But then when an actual human child comes along, they're suddenly demoted. So they're either put out in the backyard, they're not allowed on the couch, or in some cases actively killed or dropped off at a shelter. So in writing, and this is Daphna Shir-Vartesh, I believe is the author's name, in writing about flexible personhood.
Sorry, can you repeat the name of the author? Sorry, the name of the author?
I'm going to butcher her name, so I'm not going to try. I think it's Daphna Shir-Vartesh, but we did an event with her at the Multispecies Salon. If you go on our website, you should be able to like search for pets as persons, or you can also email me or direct message me if you can't find it. But you know, she's engaging with David Harvey's idea of flexible citizenship, but thinking about personhood in this relational ethics kind of way, and looking at you know, all kinds of changes in people's households that lead to this sudden transformation of the ethical landscape. So all of a sudden, a creature that was afforded ethical regard is demoted. I riff on that idea in Emergent Ecologies in a chapter called Multispecies Families, which is about snakes, frogs, and birds that wind up in people's households, and where personhood is also flexible, but also specific in a sense. Like some creatures are more personable than others, and you know, some are more, some critters do better in human households and respond to our demand for touch and mutual regard. And I think the ability to be personable is, you know, if you look at it ethnographically, so if you're able to get into households and hear how people are talking to their dog about the particular character of the dogs in a household, you know, I would imagine that that's playing a role in these decisions. But yeah, I mean, I think in the same way that bats should not be killable, dogs should not be killable in this current moment. And, you know, how do we live with this shared vulnerability that cuts across species lines? You know, I've seen some, as people are talking about bubbles, about, you know, the sort of the pandemic pods that they roll with in human worlds, I'm seeing the same language being rolled out for pets and companion animals. So, you know, like there probably is a risk to hanging out with stray cats right now. But, you know, if we can think about biopolitics and microbiopolitics in this new era, I think the same sorts of calculations that we're doing in social worlds, like those are happening in multi-species worlds too. So I think it's a very, very fertile site for ethnographic, multi-species ethnography research right now. So keep it up. I can't wait to read it.
So thanks so much. We have 3 more questions. One is now from Anne-Stephanie Aronson.
Yeah, hi, my name is Anne-Stephanie Aronson. I'm an anthropologist of Japan. Thank you very much for this great presentation. I have a question that relates to what Cesar, Giraldo, Herrera was talking about the whether the viruses are dead or alive, and which also goes back to the paper from Dupré and Güttinger, viruses as living processes. I'm I'm co-authoring a paper on agency and viruses, and I wanted to know what you would say about, so leaving the discussion of whether the virus is dead or alive aside. I mean, Güttinger and Dupré, they say that they suggest that a virus were living when active in a larger system, but not when in a dormant virion stage. So they make this distinction, but leaving that aside, when you look at agency and you differentiate between attributed agency, which is attributed by a human, where you can say like, okay, so stones or trees or gods, you attribute it actively to the object, they have agency, or you have an inherent agency, where it can also be attributed, but it's different from attributed. It's inherent, like going back to the work from Eduardo Kohn in How Forests Think and the perception of self there. So I was wondering in how you would say that the current pandemic, if the SARS-CoV-2 had some level of agency, or if this necessarily needs to be tied to the question of aliveness, or whether that can be detached from it. I was just trying to understand it.
Yeah, for starters, I'll say in some ways I'm a very conservative thinker in the sense that I think the distinction between life and non-life is important. And so I'm going back to the Gnostic thinkers through Carl Jung, through Gregory Bateson. The distinction between pleroma and creatura is important to me. And I explore this in a piece that I wrote with Nick Shapiro about the specificities of chemical agency. So we wrote a piece called the Chemoethnography, an Introduction. And in that piece, we're trying to attend to the specificities of, the haunting legacies of toxic chemicals, the altered phenomenologies that we have as a result of either taking drugs or having some kind of unintentional industrial exposure, the ways that chemical species endure on timescales that are very difficult for us to perceive and understand, whether that's on microseconds or I've got this crazy crystal that's supposed to last like 10 times longer than the universe has been around. So the idea of species in a chemical realm is radically different from how we think about species in a biological realm. So within the realm of creatura, within the realm of the living, I think there's emergent dynamics. Going directly to your question of agency, there's also emergent ethical sensibilities, I think. I mean, and these, we all kind of at a certain point have to own up to our situatedness within particular intellectual traditions. Beth Povinelli has done some great work on Aboriginal groups in Australia that regard particular rocks as agential beings. And, speaking from my own grounded phenomenology in a tradition of, Western ontologies and epistemologies, yeah, for me, there's emergent ethical responsibilities that one has to living systems, living communities, biospheres, and even a virus. So Mary Catherine Bateson has I've mentioned her a couple of times today too. She's got a great piece about the xenocide that was attempted towards the smallpox virus. So like this deliberate act of humanity to eradicate a form of life, as she frames it, from the planet. So, what kind of ethical regard does one have for a virus? I think that question shifts radically when you recognize yourself as a virus, right? We are the intergenerational products of viral becomings. Like, and I haven't seen anyone write, I just discovered this yesterday. So, Haraway writes about the the fungi and bacteria and all the other microbes wiggling in the spaces that we call our bodies. But it's surprising that no one in multi-species studies, at least not that I've seen, has picked up on this old news from 20 years ago when Eric Lander sequenced he's the first author. There's, of course, these are grand collaborative projects, but the human genome is more than 50% virus. Like, that's kind of a big deal. Yeah. So yeah, I think, even if it's not alive, what, and maybe it's less a question of ethics, but more a pragmatic question of living together. So how does one live with parasites is a question I also explored in emergent ecologies. I've got a chapter that looks at microparasites, also macroparasites, landlords and chemical companies that do predatory lending schemes to farmers. So how do we live with these tenacious micro and macro parasites? It's less, when you're entangled in a life or death struggle with another organism, what are possible futures? Like this is the conundrum that we're forced to reckon with. And I think really this moment has brought an end to the hubris that humans are exceptional. I think that 1918 pandemic was seen as a thing of the early modern past. Science and technology has liberated us in a selective sense, right? Anthropos is not this unified subject. So I also work in West Papua where cholera is rampant, where people don't have access to ultrasounds, where a measles epidemic wiped out 60 children a year before my last visit. Where tuberculosis is a big thing, where I've had malaria 12 times. So like the uneven landscape of modern health and civilization is this historical political product. And that product and project has come unraveled at the seams. So I think in telling the story of this multi-species emergence, it's not only thinking about the specificities of viral agency, but these long histories of modernity that have tried to liberate us from a certain condition, tried to liberate the human from nature. And we've known that that's failed, like conceptually, for a long time. But I think, like, ontologically, phenomenologically, politically, this is the first moment in recent history that it's visible.
Correct. Great. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thanks. Now we have a question from Faima Al-Farabi. I'm going to read it, but Faima, if you want to jump in, just do it. As I listened to your work and others' input into it, I was wondering about the part where you talk about shared vulnerabilities. The question that raised its head in my mind was, to what extent? I'm from Bangladesh, and here the proactiveness from government was absent from the beginning, and now the virus is very successfully making its way within a large part of the population. While this is not an exclusive scenario, the lack of response and disorientation in general regarding the management of the contagion makes me think the realities of the disease are vastly different from country to country. Sorry for the long comment. I was also thinking that the population that travels by air also includes people from low-income class who work in high-earning countries for more money. In Bangladesh, it meant that the disease literally traveled through wage earners, returnees from other countries. So thanks, Faima.
Super interesting. And do Faima want to say anything in addition to the written comment? I think I see you on there, but I can also, go ahead.
Dr. Kirksey, I just wanted to add something. It was getting already so long. I just wanted to add one thing. You had said that this kind of break from normal life would make us kind of ponder on the whole global climate situation, and later on someone contributed that the post-humanist aspect of this whole pandemic. But I think in some countries, like countries like mine, I think the reality is so far away from that. I mean, we can't afford to think about climate change because we are just racing to save our lives. There is this artificial dichotomy that has been made between living and survival. I mean, if you survive the disease, living means making a living. People are forced to work out of their homes because it hasn't been there is no other way to make their lives go on. So I was thinking that how far away my thinking. I'm also I like to think along post-humanist lines, but I wonder how far away am I from my own people. So I just wanted to share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the rich and important intervention. And I think, yeah, this moment is exposing, you know, so that idea of shared vulnerability also comes with profound inequalities and maybe architectures of immunity or community or you know, biopolitical protection. So Celia Lowe's piece about viral clouds in 2010 about H1N1 influenza looks at how multimillionaires and billionaires in Indonesia had basically private security firms doing contingency planning for them in the event of a pandemic or in the event of civil unrest. So there's always the possibility of escape for certain classes of people, and that doesn't always go well. I mean, I think, yeah, some folks who were trying to escape in moments got infected in airports in this current pandemic. But your point that it's not just, you know, well-heeled international scholars or businessmen, but also migrant workers who are in precarious situations. I think also of Indonesian laborers who go to Abu Dhabi and Saudi Arabia and Shenzhen and Shanghai, people who work as nannies, as construction workers.
The first batch of people who returned were mostly from Italy.
Oh, wow. Interesting. And yeah, so what, and in part, so like trying to take apart that map, like there's all kinds of ways that maps are doing interesting things right now. So I just saw one yesterday that mapped the different counties in the United States that by racial demographic, looking at, you know, the communities in which African Americans or Mexican Americans were the predominantly impacted group. And that mapping work is incredibly important. And, you know, making clear the ways that this is an uneven moment is really important. I also want to add, like for many of my friends in West Papua who are already living with malaria, who are living with measles and tuberculosis, this isn't such a big deal right now. Like, it's almost like, what pandemic, you know? It's like, you know.
It applies here too.
Yeah, you know.
Many people are like that, and many are silent carriers.
Right, and I think in all kinds of national contexts right now, like some countries have been pretty proactive in supporting people who can't go to work or don't want to go to work, but here in the U.S., like the ways that the relief package were structured gave the bulk of support to established businesses rather than individual people. So that means, like, I got my groceries delivered one day by a young African-American woman who had a baby and a toddler in the back seat and her husband performing childcare. Like, it was just a profound moment, just making my own privilege visible, someone who's able to self-isolate in a rural place. And, you know, how do we reckon with, you know, our own privileges, our own relative precarity, privilege? Like, it's such a complicated landscape that we're all nested within. So I think, are you going to be writing about this? Because I think it's really important, the stories that you're following here.
Where? I mean, you mean as in academic media, or? I've thought about it, but then I think it's mostly available through news. If you search Bangladesh and COVID-19 right now, you will get the picture. So yeah, unless I can connect it with other kind of anthropological insight or academic insight, I don't think I'll write.
Well, one forum I think that would love to have you is cultural anthropology. Heather Paxson is the editor right now, and she's put out an open call for you know, reports on COVID-19. There's a bunch of things. So please do write about it. I would love to read it.
Okay, thank you. That was inspiring. I'll try.
Yeah. Yes, Faima, thanks. And it's nice, you know, that we can mingle our ideas and create new knowledge. We have a last comment from Alastair Poil-Luc, and then also, if there is time, I would have a question for Eben. Alastair, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Many thanks, Eben, for your talk. Very inspiring. And interesting to see the kind of cross references that I'm used to reading and what you tend to read. I should say that I'm not an anthropologist. I was originally a plant ecologist for well over a decade. And I spent the last 2 decades in design, in sort of sustainable design, social design, ecological design, and design activism. And I put a comment in the chat. But before I go on to that comment, I go back to this point that actually the key agent in the life of COVID-19 is the human. It's the human political and economic power and infrastructures. And the fact that, I can't remember who the historian said quite recently, I think in the last 10 years, we're no longer a civilization, but we're just a mobilization. And I think that really we could consider, if we're really thinking in multi-species terms, we could consider that cats, dogs, tigers, pangolins are the victims here. And it was the human agency and the incredible movement we have today, whether it's privileged people or whether it's laborers, as we heard from Al-Farabi, moving to do work in the global economy, low-paid work as well, which is interesting. And it reminds me of, I was searching for some information. I'm working on a small agricultural project here in South Tyrol. Roberta and Alvise are colleagues of mine, where I was looking at many graphs that the European Environmental Agency had produced. And I downloaded about 40, and I suddenly saw one with a repeat pattern. And I went back through the other 39 to find out what it was. And the 2 patterns that aligned were very simple. They were 2 diagrams or 2 graphs of Europe. One of intensive agriculture, which perfectly aligned with the intensity of alien species. So, yes, we were the primary agents when we move agriculture around the world in whatever form, machinery, food, goods. We're the primary agents in introducing all the aliens, which of course some integrate with the ecological systems and some destroy them. So again, our agency, we're really looking at maybe 500 years of global movement where we've had this agency. But now, and I come on to my comment in the chat, it's really maybe we should focus, whether we're an anthropologist or an ecologist or a designer or a philosopher, more on these, what I called in the chat, these assemblages of intensive mobile globalization. This is where the virological soup is possible, I guess. I can give a more micro example. When I travel from Bolzano to Milan, I go on the Venice-Milan train. And in any one carriage, you have people from 50 countries. You know, it's a perfect microcosm for a multi-species sharing of our viruses. So we have to, I think, intensive farming. I really enjoyed reading the work of Blanchett recently, and I want to get his Porkopolis book. But I read his paper, which Roberta gave to me, and it deeply affected me, because we have this knowledge about intensive farming, and it's very interesting. I think the intensive farming industry pays to put more stuff out about pointing the finger at wild animals, because it doesn't want the finger pointing back at intensive farming. Yet there are good scientific papers that show that we've had thousands of epidemics in intensive farming that could have easily turned into pandemics. But we have intensive tourism. Venice, the nearby city, 20 million people arriving in a city of 50,000 people. We have intensive goods movement. And if we look at Amazon today, it's sending even more parcels around the world. We don't know what's in all those parcels, but they're moving. Sporting events, political events. We had the event where a football match in Bergamo, the Valencia supporters took back huge numbers of COVID virus to Spain. So we had this intensive mobilization. And this is, I think, where anthropology and the ethnographic approaches could be very interesting if we combine them with the speculative materialists who've actually talked about how materials move around the world and how they create assemblages. So look, a lot of thoughts rather than a very specific question, and you don't have to take any of them or just give your general reaction. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that.
Thanks, Alistair. Sorry if I interrupt. Maybe we collect also Rachel Bourne question, and so you can answer both. Is that fine for you?
Okay, I'll try to remember.
Oh no, okay. If it's urgent,
I'll just be super quick. It's a citation.
So short answer, Eben, because I was raising a lot of things. So just pick whatever.
So in addition to that story of human agency, I would add the agency of capital, and you know, Marx is a premier theorist of capital as agency, and there's a brilliant paper by Tim Mitchell that very much influenced how I think about multi-species ethnography and multi-species studies. It's called Can the Mosquito Speak? And he's attending to not only the agency of capital, this force that possesses the human and bends the human towards its will to reproduce itself, but you know, Mitchell's attending to the agency of dams and pumps and mosquitoes and plants. But I think in attending to the agency of capital, I'm also thinking about that pronoun we that you were using, and insisting, you know, along with Jason Moore and others who've written about the Capitalocene, is that the anthropos isn't a unified subject. There's power differentials. So there's shareholders and CEOs, and I mean, power is a complicated thing in this moment, but I think recognizing power inequities and inequalities generated by capital flows is an important part of this really complex story of intensive global assemblages that we're trying to tell.
Thanks, Eben. Now, Rachel Bourne. Rachel, you.
Can you hear me? Hey, Eben, thanks so much.
Rachel.
Good to see you, and it was a really great article. I was thinking a little bit about back on what Fahima was saying earlier about feeling a little bit far from your community, and it reminded me of something that Audra Simpson said, a Mohawk scholar who was talking or responding to this very point, a question about this way back in Montreal at the National Women's Studies Association meeting about 4 years ago. And her response was that home is the first place that I take my work. And it was really a conversation about responsibilities. And that kind of segues, I think, for me into, Eben, what you've been talking about. And what struck me, unfortunately, I wasn't able to hear Warwick speak last night, but I did read the pieces, and I was thinking about that philosophical piece that he shared with us, and thinking that his call was interesting. It was a call to sort of pull back and to reflect in this moment, and in a different way, which I thought was quite lovely. As that philosophical response, and equally lovely, I think, is what you're pushing forward here, and that is a different kind of responsibility to do cultural studies and anthropology, and to address, to very carefully look at the science, to very carefully look at the work, and to try to do this work now in this moment. And I guess the question that I would like to pose here, and again, I think it's something that maybe, Robbie, you can certainly probably add to this next, because I know it's something we've been talking about as well. But I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about why this is such a crucial moment to be doing the kind of work that you're doing and tell us a little bit more about what it's like to try to piece the kinds of archives that you're piecing together just right now, because it just is so fast. It's such a fast paced moment as well. So I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
So Eben, if you don't mind, I join and I pose you my question because it links somehow to what Rachel asked you. So as you said, this pandemic is an assemblage, and we disentangle this assemblage, analyzing it. We see there is a micro dimension, and you show all these nice pictures at the beginning, giving us a taste of what the debate is among virologists. But at the same time, you concluded your slides with these pictures of protesters in the streets. So we go from the micro to the micro, to this wide and broad social political context. And yes, it is an assemblage, but sometimes when I have tried, or others have tried, to speak about this connection between these different dimensions, this kind of discourses, this kind of multi-species approach has received sometimes two kinds of reaction: either silence, so no comment about that, no thought about that, no discourse about these connections, or has been perceived as an offensive approach, because people point to we also have pointed now here to the great asymmetries of power and risk and responsibilities. So people say why we should speak about the virus perspective. We are confronted with very important social and political issues. So the question is, yes, we are confronted with that problems, but the solution to try to find an escape from that is exactly to mingle the two different scales. But the question for me is how can we promote this kind of approach, and how can we promote a common cause between the environmentalist agenda and the social and political agenda of emancipation for exploited humans? Thank you.
Well, I think, in part it's finding areas of shared interest, shared responsibility, and just spaces for collaboration. But it's also getting inside of the generative frictions, right? And, when medical knowledge and scientific knowledge and various kinds of institutional forms has blindnesses, or is actually reinforcing some of these inequities, like that's kind of our job too. So, I see my responsibility as an ethnographer, as a scholar in humanities, is to be very nimble in terms of, the purview of my focus, but kind of bringing in the specificity of a particular contact zone, I think, to use a term. So like in this new book, The Mutant Project, it's as much about emergent regimes of inequality as it is about, how cool CRISPR is. Like if you like Google CRISPR right now, it's like there's all these laudatory things that everyone's saying about it. The challenge of that book project has been to get inside of that speculative hype, to deflate it and reposition the conversation. And the stories I tell in there are about this white space I entered, a laboratory that's manufacturing the world's first gene therapy that was approved by the FDA. So now you can buy it if you have $500,000 and your kid has leukemia, because your insurance won't cover it. So if you can come up with $500,000, you might be able to treat your kid from leukemia. But this was a white space, and instead of just telling the story of science, I tell the story of Nick Wilkins, the Asian American boy, who is the one person of color in that space. And I make a very uncomfortable encounter with science. And I anticipate as I go forward and try to find some of these sites of COVID research, I mean, there's ways that narrowing the scientific gaze to get at the specificity of a problem is incredibly reductive. And, you know, to learn about the surface proteins of COVID-19, to learn about the way that is being and becoming with other kinds of agents in the world, you know, a certain narrowing of vision becomes necessary. But then, like, following those lines of flight, following those chains of association, you know, figuring out where to go next, and in your process of ethnography, and in your process of collaboration, in your process of negotiating, you know, what George Marcus is describing his methods for para-ethnography, of negotiating these spaces of shared critical interests, where you might elicit ambiguous alternative perspectives on these systems, these processes, these moments, these events that we're all entangled with. So how do you create this space of curiosity, collaboration, but also critical dissonance and friction with these scientific experts? So that's maybe also answering one of the earlier questions on method. Also watch this space. I'm working on a project called Multispecies Justice in collaboration with Sophie Chow and Karen Bolander and a bunch of other fabulous people. We're working on an edited book collection that probably won't be out anytime, you know, next year or the following year, but like these issues of science and justice are kind of central to them. So, you know, I think it's important to take seriously the ways that biology, the environmental sciences, molecular biology produce knowledge about the world, but to complicate that and to so there's narrative techniques of juxtaposition. There's ethnographic techniques of following these lines of flight. So how do you get inside of dominant narratives and do the work of repositioning? I see that as one of my key critical tasks, like how and where to focus the attention. And back to Rachel about the fastness of time and history. Even, I mean, it's sort of like we're kind of in the we're in a different homogeneous empty time. I feel like pandemic time is all kinds of weird. But in that time, like what Rachel and Roberta and others have done together is we've just tried to go slow, like reading, like that's what we know how to do, right? So above all, I'd like to invite everyone who's been here this whole time and listened to the talk to come and read with us. And if like Cesar, you have suggestions of things that you want to read, bring those, and we will work through it together and bring this nimble multidisciplinary perspective to bear on texts. So thank you, Roberta, for organizing.
Oh, thanks you, Eben, for your generosity and your endurance, because this webinar has been really long and intense. I find it very interesting, so thank you very much. We slow down as well, and we go toward the end, toward the conclusion. At the end of your article, you mentioned that biophilia, love for other forms of life, can be a way on how to live in the pandemic. This being an opportunity to reflect about our impact on other forms of life, to learn to better care for other vulnerable species, and to feel our interdependency. And through this webinar, we have learned that through doing that, we also care for the other humans. So with this wish and this hope, we end this webinar. Thanks, Eben. I also thank Evaa for making this possible, and Alvise for his assistance. And of course, I thank you, all of you that participated to this webinar. Thank you so much, and hope keep in touch.
Okay, just one last word. Thank you very much to everybody, especially clearly to Eben and Roberta. And just the information, you find many of the information in the chat, but the recording of this webinar will be on the Evaa website, and I'm not repeating the URL, the URL you will find in the chat, but I mean, just you digit Evaa Bozen and you will find it in case. In few days, just be patient. Okay, so
And I
thank you
might
very
just
much.
add to find the reading group, just go on Facebook, and even if you're not on Facebook, you can find how to subscribe on our Google group to get the email. But it's just Coronavirus Multispecies Reading Group. Just those,
I put the link also in the chat. So
thank you, Alice. Thank you for hosting. This has been a delightful conversation.
Okay, thank you very much. Was really, I mean, huge in a way for us that we are a very small association. Was really huge, and so thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, Roberta. Thank you, Eben, and see you around the world, I guess.
Yeah.
See you.
Thanks
Everyone for the smart questions.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.